The Information Technology and General Services Committee will now come to order. We're going to take items in order of 3, 2, 1 today. We'll begin with item number 3.
Item number 3, motion Weiss Cardenas relative to the transfer of jurisdiction of former Fire Station 83 located at 5001 North Balboa Boulevard from the Department of General Services to the Department of Recreation and Parks. This item has also been referred to the Arts, Parks, Health, and Aging Committee.
Okay, and it appears that the GSD indicates that the surplus property has been completed for, process has been completed for this property. Is there anybody here to speak on item number 3? Anybody here from the public? We're on item number 3. I do not see any public comment cards filled out for item number 3 before me. Anybody here to speak on item number 3? Seeing and hearing none, public comment on item number 3 is now closed. Appears to be that all of the process required for this item are in order. We have a motion to approve. Yes, moved by Councilmember Parks. This item is approved. Next, we move to item number 2.
Item number 2, CAO report relative to the sale of surplus property located at 3671-3689 South Vermont Avenue to the Community Redevelopment Agency. This item has also been referred to the Housing, Community, and Economic Development Committee.
Okay. It appears that there was a typographical error. The figure should be $3.99 million is the appraised value of the property, not 3.38. Okay. So we'll clarify that for the record, that the item is relative to the valued amount for the property being $3.399 million, not $3.38 million. We're on item number 2 on the agenda. Is there anybody here to speak to item number 2?
Jason with the CEO's office. This is our report. We will recommend that you find, the mayor and council find that the property is no longer required for the city use and that the public's best interest is served by a direct sale to CRA. Also find that the property is exempt from the CEQA and adopt the attached ordinance for this transfer, and also instruct the GSD to complete the transaction as outlined in the ordinance.
Okay. All right. With that, we're now open for public comment on item number 2. Is anybody here to make comment on item number 2? I do not see any public comment cards filled out for item number 2. Is anybody here to speak on item number 2? Seeing and hearing none, public comment on item number 2 is now closed. With that, we'll request that the CRA board make the necessary changes to reflect the correct appraisal amount of $3.399 million. It was erroneous put down as $3.38 million. And also amend their fiscal year 08-09 budget and work program to secure the necessary funding. With that, do we have a motion to approve the CAO report?
I'd like to add one
Yes.
direction before we do that, is that we also ask CRA to work in conjunction with LAPD and City Family, that this site, since the library's moved, has become a crime problem and has become community eyesore. We just recently received a letter from USC as to gang members taking over this site, and we'd ask that they take the appropriate time and energy to secure that facility, either via fencing or whatever's appropriate.
Okay.
Secure that facility.
Isn't CRA in existence to help reduce blight and things of that nature?
Yeah, that's
Okay. That's an ironic accident that they would allow the property to do that. Okay, we'll include those instructions to CRA and the appropriate departments. And with that, we have a motion to approve the CAO report?
I move that.
Okay, CAO report is moved with those recommendations. Now we move to item number 1.
Item number 1, CAO report response to motion Weezer Cardenas relative to a transfer of title of the city-owned property located at 527 South Crocker Street to the LAMP Community and Related Matters.
Okay, is anybody here from staff on this matter?
Yes, Borough Taylor from the CEO's office.
Okay. Can you speak to what the restrictions are on this property? It appears that it has something to do with HUD.
Yes, HUD regulations stipulate that property that's renovated with HUD funds should be, sale of that property has to be based on the fair market value of the property. So we will not be able to transfer the property to LAMP without them providing the fair market value, which is estimated at $2 million by GSD.
So today's value is $2 million.
Yes.
Okay. So what we're discussing here today is not a sale, but a long-term lease?
Yes,
And how long is that lease?
20 years.
Okay. The only thing is, we have the chairman of the Budget Committee who's been running point on the pending findings of the not-for-profit lease working group when it comes to surplus property, and we've had a very interesting history on allowing not-for-profits to utilize these properties and at what value or what rental values, et cetera. But this is a lease, long-term lease, not a month-to-month rental. Any questions, Mr. Parks? Anything you'd like to
One
clarify?
thing, and I don't know if whether the CAO or somebody's here from the CLA to give us an idea of where that new financial policy is or how close we are to getting it before committee. Because I know there was a couple of things that they were discussing and basically using the developmental fees and the issue of special events fees as a model, that there was a consideration as to assessing whether these nonprofits, what their overall economic value was, in the sense of whether they, some of the nonprofits significantly, if you look at their balance sheet, they're not viewed as nonprofit. They have significant financial wherewithal. The other issue was whether it is in the interest of the city to allow nonprofits, whatever their interest is to have a lease beyond the term of the people that are initiating it, so that you did not have a circumstance where we're finding nonprofits getting more and more in the political mainstream as to using their sites and some of their people in the political process. And so one of the things, before I can vote on, I need to find out where that issue is as relates to looking at the overall financial history of the business. I have no doubt, and it's having known LAMP, that they have done a good job in that area, but also I would not like to approve something that is significantly contrary to what is a pending city financial policy that's moving forward.
I'll have to get that information for you. The reason for we brought this one forward was due to the urgency of the, I guess, the LAMP, and they would probably provide that information to you. It's in the process of about to receive $3 million to provide renovations to the property. And they would need site control. I think they need site control in order to be able to acquire these funds. And I think they've acquired 1.8 million to date, but they're not able to get the remaining.
Would site control be a lease? Or
Yes, the
ownership?
long-term lease would give them site control.
Long-term, not more.
Acquisition of the property would have been better, but I guess they went back to their grantors or whoever, the sources of funding, and they were okay with the long-term site control. And essentially, we're continuing the same, whatever they were doing from the month to month. And I'm not sure what the likelihood would have been for them to have made a change even over the next few years with regards to the use of the facility. So the long-term lease or month-to-month in this case is probably maybe one and the same.
Is there anyone here from GSD?
Yes.
I was just wondering, the document that was written by GSD is kind of a model that's being viewed for the city policy. Are you aware of where that policy is, or whether GSD is still working on it, or is it in the...
GSD is still in the process of responding to your motion where you requested that we provide you with all the nonprofit leases in your district and evaluate them and the rental rate, as well as for all the 15 council offices.
But we had a motion a couple of years ago about creating a financial policy on how we deal with leased property in general. And we've been waiting now for literally years to see what the outcome is. And so that's the one I was referencing.
There was a policy where it was receive and file in your committee, Budget and Finance. And then we came back with a proposal of possibly charging rent anywhere from $0.25 to $1 a square foot. But that's the one we're reviewing. GSD is reviewing with other city departments, and my understanding is we're going to report back to you, to your committee, to this committee and your Budget and Finance.
Because the last time I think we dealt with the Budget and Finance, we asked, and I think both the CAO and the CLA said that it was momentary that we get this policy that we've been asking for, because we held on to that initial GSD report that listed all of what they thought were appropriate criteria, and we were hopeful that the CLA CAO would use that somewhat as a guide, and also the new language that they've used for both the developmental fees and for the convention center fees, and currently they're looking at for the special event fees, and so that we were getting out of the business of waiving fees, but getting more into subsidy of fees, and also having some criteria as to what nonprofits were, so that we could be consistent across the board. And I think one of the things that they identified was the nonprofit had an operating budget of less than, I think, $5 million, and that but there were several things that were, and I haven't read it for a while, that the lease agreements were going to incorporate a number of the things that were in the general services report. So that's why we didn't move the general service report out of committee. It was our understanding that the CLACO was going to create a policy from that report that would be part of the financial policies of the city.
Councilmember, I do know that the GSC was instructed to work on a non-profit policy, lease policy. And most of what you outlined was in their previous report. And I think what GSC is working on right now is when they came up with that draft and they talked to different departments and council office and the mayor's office, there were a lot of discussions that still had to be taken to make sure that all the input and some of the concerns be incorporated. I know that there are certain factors such as making sure that there's insurance requirement, that there's a certain level, the term of the lease and what is required, and how do you make sure that once you sign a lease, the nonprofit organizations follow through what they promise. So those are very difficult issues that they're trying to resolve right now. And also another important issue was how much do you charge? If you went with some of the market rates in some of the areas where we do have current leases, it would basically drive out the CBOs from that building, so to speak. I think JC is still struggling with trying to figure out what would be a fair and equitable way to price that model. The staff was talking about 50 cents or $1 a square foot. Obviously, depending on what type of city building you're talking about, the value would vary significantly. So those are the issues that they're working on, and they will come through with a nonprofit leasing policy. But I do not know how long it will take for GSC to feel comfortable enough to submit a draft policy on that.
But I think the thing is that they've been working on this for about 2 to 3 years. And again, the last time we brought it up at Budget Finance, they said we were on the verge of bringing forth policy, which is coming to the word, and we're still waiting. And I think one of the key factors was the issue of this term, because the issue comes up with is that we have people that have established relationships individually, and they lead the charge to give property to a nonprofit, they move on, and those nonprofits do not have the same relationship. And in some instances, we've seen it become very, not only combative, but anti-new person. And so you're saying that we're tying the hands of those who are in office, who have the control of these facilities, being put in a position to where they have to overcome the decisions made by those who came before them. And that's why we were moving forward to try to get these things done so that we did not bind ourselves in a fashion that we'd say was inconsistent with what was going to be proposed.
And those were the exact issues why the GSC's proposal included that provision. And
this 20 years would take you over several people's terms.
exactly. My understanding is the current report that's before you, where the term is 20 years, one of the consideration was that the sale of the property to the nonprofit was considered, but because of the HUD regulations, other things involved, that was taken off the table. At the same time, we wanted, the city wanted to make sure that there was some kind of work done at the facility to improve it, make it better. What my understanding is that the CBO was willing to commit over $3 million in providing capital improvements to the facility, and they were willing to provide the in-kind services or other services outlined in their organization's goals. And so that's why the 20-year term had to be the premise, because that's how they needed to secure the funding, the $3 million over 20 years. We did a quick calculation, and that comes out to be about, I believe, about 50 cents a square foot on a just straight calculation basis. And that was a nexus for this report.
No.
And we do understand your concern about the 20 years.
So-
That's obviously a,
But let me ask you this, is that, are you saying HUD would prevent them from being in a situation where they would put the $3 million forward and over 20 years, due to the services, they could not use that to buy the building?
no, I believe it's they needed the long-term lease to secure the funding.
Yes.
Okay, I'm saying, but are you saying HUD would prevent them from,
Well, HUD would.
No, HUD doesn't prevent them from buying it. HUD says, since HUD dollars were used on this facility, then the city has, if they want to sell it outright, not long-term lease it, then they would have to sell it at the appraised value. The appraised value is approximately $2 million. I'm a bit confused as to why an organization has access to $3 million, but they don't have access to $2 million to just purchase it outright.
I have,
You're with?
they're with.
Who are you with?
We're with Lamp Community.
You're with Lab
Yes.
Community. Did you fill out a card?
Yes.
We did.
So one of you is David and one of you is Casey?
I'm David Hurwitz. I'm the vice chair of the volunteer board of Lamp Community, and I'm also, in my other life, an attorney with O'Melveny and Myers.
And I'm Casey Haran, the executive director at Lamp Community.
Malvini and Myers, that rings a bell. What big names at Malvini and Myers?
isn't it the Warren Christopher?
Warren Christopher?
He is there.
That's pretty big. Anybody else?
I don't know if you get bigger than that.
Well, we're here to answer any questions, and that's why we stepped up.
Secretary,
Obama was a lawyer. That's a bigger name than Warren
I
Christopher.
know, but
It is.
I'm saying,
But he's not West Coast.
That's true. You-
Yes. May I?
Okay, yeah, I'm curious. I understand the dilemma. This is a facility in use. Apparently, LAMP has been utilizing this facility and providing this unique service for, 22 years now?
Yes.
They've been on a month-to-month for over a decade, it sounds like, right?
Yes.
So, but I'm curious, we've run into not-for-profits that don't have two pennies to rub together, but they're providing services somehow, and they continue, and then we got to figure out a way to make sure that they can provide those services. But what Mr. Parks is talking about, having a fair, equal responsibility when it comes to these are publicly owned facilities. Yes, there's value in service, but at the same time, there's also that real estate value, that tangible brick and mortar value. This case, you have an organization that obviously Sounds like they know what they're doing. You have a good reputation. You've been doing it for a long time. Very few organizations do this unique service. If anywhere we needed this service badly, it's in downtown where you're at. Now, what situation is LAMP in where they can actually get their hands on $3 million of renovation money, but they can't get their hands on $2 million of purchase money to purchase the property so that we can satisfy the HUD requirement, right? The HUD requirement doesn't say that we can't sell it. The HUD requirement says you can't sell it for $1. You can't sell it for, a discounted value. You have to sell it, if you're going to sell it, at the appraised value. And the appraised value seems to be approximately $2 million right now. So LAMP could buy it. It sounded like LAMP wanted to buy it.
Well, then the project would go up to about $5 million, because we'd have to buy the property as well as do the renovations in order to expand the services. So right now what we do is we have about 70% of the funds secured, and our donors and our board are requiring that we have a long-term lease. And there's been exceptional due diligence, and I certainly understand your point, Councilman Parks, about the fact that there is a plan that is in process for developing how a nonprofit can acquire a long-term lease. We have support from Mayor Villaraigosa, from Mayor Reardon, from CD9, from CD14, and we've been working on this for about 2.5 years. It is critical that this motion pass today, or the project could be in jeopardy. So just in a nutshell, I can tell you that LAMP Community has a budget of about $5 million. We've been in...
That's your operating budget?
That's our
annual
our
operating budget.
Yeah. And as you noted, we provide a very, very unique service. We're based in downtown Los Angeles, but our geographical catchment area is all of LA County. And we're serving a population, homeless men and women with severe disabilities. And what we do is we do something called permanent supportive housing. So it's not shelters or transitional housing. We move people off the streets immediately and then provide them with clinical and supportive housing. We have the highest housing stability rate in the United States. 85% of the people that we house remain housed. And not only does that transform lives and revitalize communities, but it saves city taxpayer dollars, as the cost of one of these individuals on the street is about $150,000 a year. And we house and serve them at a cost of about $16,000 a year. So we get a lot of recognition for really transforming lives and changing the downtown community.
All right. That is your reputation,
Yes.
and what you've said is very consistent with what LAMP is doing. So I don't think my colleague, Councilmember Parks, is questioning
Yeah.
the organization and
May I just
the
add a
value.
couple points about the specific renovation project?
yeah, go ahead.
So our main facility that we call the Village, that is located at 527 Crocker, as noted, we've had a lease with the city, and we've raised about 70% of the capital budget. And what this will allow us to do is many things. We're creating a community wellness center for people that live in the community. We're tripling the size of our public showers and public laundromat. It's the only public shower facility in Skid Row. We're consolidating our administrative office space, creating music studios, etc. So it will continue to be a great service for the community. The renovation dollars are funded by the Amundsen Foundation, the Weingart Foundation, DreamWorks, Participant Productions, Universal Studios, and it's also noteworthy that our board of directors has funded it at $450,000. So we have a very impressive group of institutional donors, and we must have this site control in order to break
By when?
ground. We finished all the pre-development and could break ground in January.
By when?
Sorry.
You're being very specific, but on some points you're being general.
Okay.
By when do you need to have site control?
Last week, last month, as quickly as possible.
So you have commitments, they've been patient, but at the same time, they're not going to wait around forever.
Exactly.
Okay. How many people live in this building? I mean, how many units and then how many people?
It's important.
It's not strictly one person per unit, right?
Right. We have 50 people living in this building, but what's very important, and I think one of the reasons in the early days why Councilman Huizar came on board, is that this renovation project, we are not adding any new beds. As we all recognize, there's been an overconcentration of services for the homeless in the downtown Skid Row community. So what we're doing is building on supportive services so these people can stay housed. We will not be creating any new beds.
Do you provide supportive services out of your building beyond the tenants?
Yeah, for many people that are housed in permanent housing in the downtown area. So it's additional psychiatric services, it's a money management program, it's a community wellness center, administrative hub for the agency.
Okay. So,
If you'd like to see,
why didn't the city negotiate with LAMP to do a 20-year lease with a lease purchase option embedded in it? Because as long as we embed that lease purchase option relative to the appraised value at the time that we consummate the deal, then I think that would be in accordance with HUD, wouldn't it?
I'd have to check with city attorney on that. I'm not sure.
Did
We were
anybody
never
broach this? I
exploring
mean, we got O'Melveny and Myers here, man.
Yeah.
You guys got some of the
I'm-
biggest,
yeah.
brightest minds in the world.
And
I mean,
just so I don't get in trouble with my firm, I'm here in my individual capacity as a volunteer member. I identify
yeah, but they
myself.
take credit for you being volunteering and stuff. And
Okay.
I'm sure you're on somewhere on their document saying, and we have guys for the firm that over at LAMP and they do wonderful
we
things.
were never looking to purchase the building. In fact,
Why not?
because
Does that
agency
jeopardize some of your
our-
funding?
An agency of our size would never have the resources to do so, or could not raise the money. So
But
originally,
you've got a $5 million operating budget.
Right,
And
and we
you
serve
confirmed that you have $3
more than-
million in the wings
we have
to
a $5 million
renovate it.
operating budget, but that's to provide a range of services to hundreds and
Forget
hundreds.
about the $5 million operating budget. Look, my point to you is this. Bernard Parks, for example, and myself, we represent communities that have a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
Okay? So we're familiar with large not-for-profits, small not-for-profits, some not-for-profits that should have $1 million budget, and God knows how they do it, but they live off of $200,000. We don't know how they do it, right? But you're a not-for-profit that obviously has some level of sophistication, right? And you've been in this building for a long time. You know what the building requires. You know what the building is like. You know as much as anybody about the value of the building, not only real estate value, but the value of the building to the community because of the services you render. You have sophisticated people on your board. Again, many of us council members that represent poor communities, we have a lot of not-for-profits, and very few not-for-profits have somebody like you on their board. If some not-for-profits in my community don't even have a person on the board who
For
has
us
a
to
BA
raise
or
our
higher.
operating budget every year is very, very scary. And
Look,
yeah.
I'm not passing judgment on you, okay?
Right.
To understand that. Okay, I'm trying to be helpful.
We can-
But what I'm saying is, tell me yes or no, has the board explored the option of potentially looking at having a long-term lease with the city, but at the same time embedding a potential for a purchase option within it, exercisable at the discretion of the occupant, in this case, the not-for-profit, if in fact they come across an opportunity. What if somebody bequeaths $10 million to you one year? All of a sudden, bam, there's the money. You can buy the buildings, give the city the $2 million, be done with it. Yes.
Councilman, we had an opinion from the city attorney's office on another project, and a long-term lease with an option to purchase are two separate processes. We have to go through the LA admin code to declare the property surplus.
Okay.
And so it doesn't automatically go to the tenant.
Uh-huh.
And so because of that, they want the two things separated. A long-term lease should be separated from any potential by the tenant to purchase the city property.
And maybe I can respond to the council
Sure.
member's question about what the board explored.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
We, Casey and I and some other members of the board went to the city, spoke with people from the CLA and the city attorney's office, and basically said, what is the best way to do this? We want to raise money to renovate the building ourselves without asking the city to put up the money for this building, which is in desperate need of renovation. I mean, the roof leaks, water pours through.
Sure.
And it's city-owned property, but it needs a lot of work. And after I would say, a few months of discussion with Councilmember Weezer's office, the CLA, and the city attorney, the decision was made collectively that the best way to do that was a long-term lease. Now, in response to I want to respond to the question about raising funds. It's a different thing to go to a foundation like Weingart or Amundsen and ask them for money to improve the building versus asking them to give you money to buy the building. We have not asked for that. I don't know that their guidelines, I don't know whether these other foundations would give us money to buy a building or not. I don't believe so. I believe they have guidelines to help you either operate or do capital improvements.
Yeah, basically, it sounds like they consider capital improvements like an ongoing cost, not a purchase
Correct.
endeavor. Operating cost, ongoing cost, to be able to render services.
Correct.
Kind of silly that such sophisticated philanthropic organizations would think of it that way. I personally would like to empower not-for-profits and have them own their future so that they have less precarious situations, raising of rents, getting kicked out, all those kinds of things, and they have permanency. But that's my philosophy. I don't sit on those boards. So, GSD, did you come in the room for item number 1? I want to talk to you because I have a political question. Not that you've ever endeavored in politics, but I have a political question. This particular building, the item we're talking about right now, let's be blunt. Is this not-for-profit doing the city a favor by committing to invest $3 million into this building?
Okay, you mean
They're committing, if we give them a 20-year lease, part of the agreement, correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, is that they're going to commit to investing $3 million into infrastructure in the building. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
And
Are they doing
for
us
$1 a year?
What's that?
For $1 a year.
$1 a year, but on any lease, anytime somebody commits to permanent infrastructure in a building, that is actually considered as part of the agreement, and it's factored as part of the agreement.
Correct.
People do it all the time.
We do
It's
it all
called
the time.
tenant improvements. Either the tenant does the improvements, and if the landlord does the improvements, the landlord just jacks up the price and then just makes it up on the rent.
Correct.
Right? So in this case, we're not charging them that $3 million in rent. They're investing into the building.
Correct.
Can it be, is it fair to say, I won't say they're doing the city a favor, is that in some way a benefit to the city for them to do it? Because we own the building, and if they don't do it in the condition that the building's in right now, we as a city, really, as a landlord, should figure out where to get the money to fix the roof and to fix the plumbing and do all the things that they're going to do with $3 million, shouldn't we?
Yes, we should with all of our buildings. And
Yeah,
the whole
exactly.
purpose of the policy, the nonprofit policy, is because we don't, either because we're in tight budget situations, we don't have the money to repair our facilities. We allow nonprofits who have a general good for the community to come in with a public benefit, to come in and expend that capital improvement into the building. And in exchange for that, we only charge them $1 a year. So it's supposed to it's supposed to be mutually beneficial to the community and to the city. So it's not just all on one side.
And even though we haven't solidified and finalized the not-for-profit policy on our properties where we lease them to not-for-profits, even though we haven't done that, how often do we see in not-for-profits actually figure out a way to infuse $3 million into one of our buildings that they're leasing? Is that common at all?
I would say that's very uncommon.
I mean, I've seen it in my short time here. I've seen 100,000 here, 100,000 there, but not $3 million.
No, not to the magnitude. Maybe a handful out of over 120.
Yeah, the only one that I can think of is the Latino Museum. They committed in excess of $1 million or something like that in renovations. Or something.
Community Coalition and the Council District 8 have expended a lot of money. Conservation Corps and CD9 have put a lot of improvements in buildings. There's It's about a
But
handful.
that's literally a handful when you look at dozens and dozens of other scenarios where, I mean,
Correct.
where we get a little bit, they invest 10,000 here or 10,000 there or 100,000 here. Or they don't call us when the plumbing's out. They got to deal with it themselves. All those kinds of things, but not to the tune of millions of dollars.
Correct.
Okay, that is rare.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. Now, aside from that, as far as we can tell, has anybody questioned that what LAMP is providing within the building, and also they just expressed that they actually serve clientele in the general area in our most populated concentration of people who need these kinds of services? Is that a benefit to the city?
I have not heard any complaints as far as what they provide to the community. Normally, the Community Development Department is the one that actually looks at the programmatic responsibility and whether or not they're fulfilling it.
But in other words, I haven't heard anybody say that LAMP doesn't, what they chose to do there, that they don't do a good job at what they do.
I've heard nothing but compliments.
Exactly. I've heard that from the council members on both sides of the street. I think it's two council members are pretty close to each other right there as far as whose district. So actually, you serve people from the 9th district inevitably, right?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
All right. Yeah, I agree with Bernard Parks that we've been waiting a long time for us to solidify this policy. We need to do that. It's a bit too loose, but I'm looking at, unfortunately, until then, I have to look at this on a case-by-case basis. And on this particular property, I haven't heard from the council office yet, but on this particular property, this particular not-for-profit tenant, in this particular unique situation where they're committing to $3 million in improvements on their dime as occupants in return for a 20-year lease, I think that's a little bit more consistent with what I'd like to see happen in the future when we solidify a policy. Council office? Peter? Just answer me one question first. Has the councilman left the building? Because I called this meeting just mainly for item number 1.
The council member is in a conflicting meeting at this time.
Okay.
Good afternoon, honorable council members. My name is Peter Hidalgo, and I have the honor of serving as the chief of staff to Councilmember Jose Huizar. The council member asked me to express to you his strong support for this mutually beneficial project that's before you, which involves an organization that's found in Council District 14. The council member believes that the providing housing and services to the homeless population on Skid Row and supporting exceptional organizations with a national reputation, such as this downtown mainstay known as LAMP, is always in the best interest of the city. And in these strained economic times, there are many Angelenos who are experiencing hardships. Anything that the city can do to assist in enhancing the services with and even improve their facilities is exactly what we are seeking. We are grateful to the working group that's made up of a number of city family staffs who have committed their time and energy to make this effort a reality, and the council member is seeking your favorable vote on this. Thank you.
And this is the council member Huizar from the 14th district, correct?
That's correct.
I need to ask you a question.
Certainly.
Casey, right?
Yes.
Yes, Casey, that has been troubling me for a long time. Have you been able to ascertain the rough estimate as to the annual expenditure based on the needs of this particular population? In other words, if a developer is going to have, or a service provider is going to have 50 people or 50 units or 100 units or what have you, with this kind of population, they really shouldn't, I believe they really shouldn't do so unless they understand the kind of services they're going to need to render. Specialized services, psychological services, medical services, all kinds of serious services.
I think that's a really important point. I think, unfortunately, what we've done in LA is While we have created some housing for the chronically homeless, those are people that are long-term on the streets and living with a disability, that we've left that service component out. So what LAMP does is whenever we have a new project, that we ensure that the appropriate service dollar is there. The service dollar for people who are long-term homeless and have a severe mental or physical disability or both is about $6,000 a year. So we have the richest level of interdisciplinary service. So in other words, we have a multidisciplinary team that consists of a part-time psychiatrist, a part-time nurse, a job life coach, a case manager, et cetera. And that is critical to keep people housed.
Do you have counselors?
We have counselors as well.
Like at master's degree level?
That's right.
Counselors, okay.
And so those people are actually, usually, they're in the housing complex. They're right there. So, for example, we have a building called the St. George on Main and 3rd, and we have a ratio of about 1 to 9. The average length of time on the streets there is about 14 years, and 88% of the people have stayed housed. And you compare that with any other model that has success rates of 5 and 6%. So the total of the housing subsidy and the service dollar comes out to about $16,000 a year. And then you compare it to what it costs for us to put someone in a cot in a shelter or leave them on the streets. And that actually is more expensive. And they just ricochet from emergency room to jail to the streets
And that
with
costs
no
more-
resolution
that-
to their homelessness.
That costs more than $16,000.
About $100,000 to $150,000 a year, and their life has not changed, and the community still has people on the streets.
Well, their life hasn't changed, but that $100 and some thousand a year is chronic.
Yeah, but what we're doing is we're sort of throwing it out the window, so that if we, in fact, invest more money in permanent supportive housing, as we're beginning to do in LA, but cities throughout the country have been doing for the last 15 years, then we can end street-dwelling homelessness in the Skid Row community, and really throughout LA. In Skid Row, we have about 1,800 street-dwelling people. We could easily do that in a matter of 3 to 5 years with a reasonable investment. Philadelphia, Portland, and on have done it in a matter of 18 months and 2 years. So LAMP really is not only the pioneer on the West Coast, but has the highest success rate in ending chronic homelessness. And we hope with this project that what we've done is there are many wonderful projects that are in the pipeline in LA, and many agencies are coming to LAMP so that they can replicate or adapt the model that we're using. So we are sharing that model with others. We have a project right now in which the permanent supportive housing with the housing and services, by 2010, it's going to be self-sustaining. And what we mean by that is we won't be using any foundation dollars and we won't be using any city taxpayer dollars. And it's going to be funded through 2 federal funding Medi-Cal mechanisms. And it will be the only project of its kind in LA County. And we already have lots of different projects that are looking to us so that they can use this model to integrate these, what we call FQHC and DMH Medi-Cal funding mechanisms, so that these permanent supportive housing programs will be self-sustaining in the long term.
And when are you going to start that?
It's already started. We're hoping to get a sort of a seed grant from Kaiser Permanente of about $500,000. And so the project's ongoing, but we are receiving funds from different sources. But we hope to achieve sustainability by the end of 2010. So that all of the money that's generated will be through federal dollars. So we'll alleviate the burden on the city and the county and the foundations and others.
I believe you. I just find it hard to believe.
Oh, it's doable. We're almost there.
Oh, I never thought I'd see miracles in my lifetime, but I guess I will if you're right.
Let me just ask, if the math is accurate, you've been in the building since '86?
Yes.
Okay. How much do you believe that you've improved the building during that period of time? 22 years.
The HUD money that's referred to has been some CDBG money. So we've used those funds as well as probably every year, just in terms of maintenance and regular upgrades, additional hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we're continually making investments in terms of the upkeep of the building.
Is that from your funds or from?
Oh, those are from a variety of funds.
But
Some of,
the not-for-profit controls.
pardon? All of it are funds, yes.
I mean, are they city funds, are they block grant?
No, nothing recently from block grant funds
So,
for rehab.
Now, after 22 years of having access to the building, I mean, what I'm looking at is from the city perspective, if this lease isn't renewed, then it becomes back a city building after 22 years of service. And so whatever that city's investment is in that building, they're going to have to put a great deal of money to bring it up to code and all that other, whatever they're going to do with it. And the same process we have now, if we have a lease for 20 years, somewhere at 2028, we're going to have a situation where you say, either here's your building,
Right.
or give me another 20 years.
Right.
And so the issue is that, in fact, you're looking for, we're saying light 20 years, but you're really looking for a lifetime lease. Because I don't expect you're looking in
Yeah.
the future to move from the building.
That's true.
So you're looking for a lifetime lease in increments.
It would be nice
of
if
20
you
years.
gave us a lifetime lease, but this gives you the opportunity to ensure that the organization is healthy and continues to provide exceptional service.
See, that's what my concern is I think that if we were looking to give you a lifetime lease,
Yeah,
then what we should do is something different. We should basically ask the districts that want to give you this building to look within their CRA areas and to back out money from their tax increments to buy the building, to put the HUD money back into a fund where, or block grant money to where we can reinvest that money into the city that we used initially. And then you should be able, at their blessing, to buy the building for 20 years of the service that you're dealing with, and you won't have those kinds of issues. And in 20 years, irrespective of how much the building is worth or what condition it is, it will belong to you, instead of you looking and saying, in 20 years, after 40 years, here's your building back.
Right.
Because in 40 years, the building may not be worth much, and the city could have those same leaky roofs and all that other stuff that then impacts our general fund. And so I just think that in looking at these, is that if we truly are interested in giving you a lifetime lease, then we should put you in a position to own the building. Then you won't have to have leaky roofs looking at
Right.
where the city should repair it or not repair it. And every 20 years, you shouldn't have to be here if you're providing the service. And at some point in time, if you decide to get a bigger building or a better building, or the population moves and you need to move to another location, you would have all the wherewithal to do that. And also, if you had to go to the bank and borrow some money,
That's right.
you would have
That's right.
site control.
That's right. In fact,
But-
I very much appreciate your perspective, and just
but-
to give you...
But
the
every
ba-
20 years to come in and say, give me a 20-year lease.
In fact, when we first started, we were poised, we were asking not to buy the building, but a transfer of the deed to Lamp Community. And Councilman Huizar had made a motion to that effect, and they had done extraordinary background checks on it, and we thought that was about to happen, and then we found out this sort of CDBG
But I think
issue.
there's-
That has the
Right.
federal requirement.
See, but I think there's an option that they could do that. It's a matter of what the color of the money is. It's whose money is available, and if the district believes, in this effort, they could actually go within their CRA areas and find money of a different color, and to give back the HUD money or wherever it goes, allow the city to reinvest
You
that.
get the deed.
Yeah,
Then-
right.
Then you then can buy the building with your service. We're doing that right now with UMA Clinic.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to have this continuous 20-year lease or whatever the lease is, and be bombarded with a situation at some point that they show up and say, here's your building. And you say, well, after 40 years, there's not much equity here.
What our hope is actually not to wait those 20 years. So when we realize with this sort of time crunch that in order to make this particular project viable, we needed to have this long-term lease right away. And the CLA's office, among many others, said this is really the only way that it's going to happen this expediently. In other words, we did, in fact, explore the possibility of transferring the deed.
It was not expedient when it's 20 years.
But on the lines of what you just said, Bernard, Peter, can you come up to the mic? It's obviously Councilmember Huizar's opinion, and it sounds like the community's opinion as well, surrounding this facility, that that the LAMP being there and provided the services for their tenants and beyond is something that people want to continue, that needs to continue. LAMP appears to be in a situation where they don't have the $2 million to meet this HUD wrinkle, because it obviously wasn't obvious to everybody until later on in the process, after we sort of made the motion to figure out how to transfer the property to LAMP. Now it appears that $2 million is the key. $2 million from somewhere, as Bernard Parks pointed out, from somewhere to the city so that HUD can be satisfied, LAMP can get the deed, is a possibility. So what I'd like you to take back to your boss, unless you already know the answer, is beyond this motion, is he committed to working with LAMP to try to figure out, as Bernard Parks just pointed out, if you can figure, because there's a lot of different kinds of, as he said, color of money floating in and around downtown Los Angeles, and $2 million, believe it or not, is not an insurmountable amount to get from one of the pots of money, be it housing department, CRA, or what have you, and then figure out a way to utilize that money to get the deed over to LAMP. It can.
I think Bunker Hills Housing Trust Fund has more money than the city of LA.
I know that, Councilmember, there has been this city family working group that has been exploring a variety of different options. I think what's at stake now is whether or not this effort is now in jeopardy. And
Oh, no, don't get me wrong. I'm saying above and beyond the motion. I'm asking you to go back to your boss, and I don't know where Mr. Parks is at, but I'm ready to vote to move this motion forward, okay? But the thing is, the dilemma that this particular case, this particular building that is owned by the city has run into is, here we go again. For a few years now, we've been trying to figure out what our parameters of policy that we're going to dictate in case by case by case to not-for-profits that occupy our buildings is still not here. That's not Council District 14's fault, and it's not LAMP's fault either. That's something that got lost in the shuffle when it comes to arriving at a policy, a place where we adopt policy in this city, okay? So I'm not going to penalize this particular item myself or you or what have you. But my point is, beyond this motion, what I'd like to hear from Councilmember Huizar, and perhaps by the time we get to the floor of the council on this matter, if Council Huizar can share with us whether or not that he's identified the money, not that it's happening right now or what have you, but just that he understands the dialogue that you, Peter, his representative, heard us in this committee, and start to figure out how you can get this property out of the city tax rolls, well, not the tax rolls, but out of the deed of this property from the city into LAMP, because LAMP expressed that if we could, we would, right? Because you started off wanting to buy the building or own the building or have the deed to the building, right? So the bottom line is, it's what I agree with Bernard Parks that it's time to get creative on this particular case in point, on this particular property, to try to figure out how to get LAMP to be the deed holder, and then go about their business. And then Huizar doesn't have to see him again talking about who owns the property or can we please stay here longer. The next council member doesn't have to deal with it either, and neither will they have to deal with it. They own their future, at least when it comes to this site, this property.
And I think the great benefit is that if the city of LA gets back the money, the value of the property, they then can reprogram it and do some of the things that we can't do because of block grant. And so the issue is that it serves a lot of purposes in the fact that we can clean up what's been going on for 22 years. And on the other hand, they would have the security of a building, and in 20 years, 2028, they can decide whether the building is worth $3 million and what they're going to do with it and whether they can leverage it.
Yeah.
We're not in that business. But in 2028, and probably the only person to still be here is Reggie, but I don't want him to be sitting trying to figure out what does he do with the building, and how old is the building now? I mean, if you've been in 22, I mean,
They've been
Yeah,
there
it was
22
the
years.
early 85, 86.
no, I mean, but how old is the building?
The actual physical building, it's a
Oh,
brick building.
Yeah, it's an older building. I don't know how old
Yeah,
the building
so
is.
the building, at some point in time, is going to need some major repair. What we don't want is to recover that building in city inventory at a point that it's in need of major repair. And I think that, but again, it gives the city the ability, the flexibility to say, we're not giving anything away. We're putting money, the color of the right money into where it could get reprogrammed. The likelihood of where the money came from, it might even get reprogrammed in the districts that are producing the tax increment to allow it to occur. They're getting the return on that over time with the services, which is a more than appropriate way for them to buy off the building. And that would be a 20-year whatever. But then at the end of 20, you don't have to look up and say, here's your building that's now 70 years old, and by the way, what are you going to do about it?
Council members, I think what you're proposing is absolutely reasonable, and I know that the council member shares the same point of
Okay.
view. Being a good steward of public funds and the responsibility he has, even sitting on Budget and Finance Committee, is also something he shares. I think it's appropriate for us to work with the city family as well as with LAMP in trying to identify what you are pointing out, but at the same time, we would hope that you would move this item.
Well, no, I hear you. What we have is, we have a solution. The problem is, it's not a permanent solution. And we have a separate problem, which is we've been trying to arrive at a policy in this city. We haven't got there yet. So here we go again, looking at a case scenario where we wish we had the blueprint and say, do you follow this blueprint? Fine, then we'll move on. This discussion would have been over an hour ago. But the fact of the matter is, what I'd like to see, since we don't have a policy in the city, is unfortunately for Councilmember Huizar, I'd like to see him tell us that on this particular case, I'm on it. I'm going to try to figure out, like as Bernard said, I'm going to try to figure out what color of money we can work with LAMP on so that LAMP can now be the deed holder and we no longer have a 20-year lease.
Is it absolutely essential from the board, the lease has to be 20 years in order for you to make a $3 million commitment?
That is what we told our funders. The board might be able to change. We'd have to go back to the
I'm
Weingart's
saying that
amount.
the likelihood that all this, is what I don't want to end up with, if they can work something out, going to look at their pots of money, and yet we then nail it down in a 20-year lease, that we defeated.
Oh, no.
Oh, no,
But
if we
there's
own
there's nothing in this lease that I can conceive of, Reggie, that says that if we give them a 20-year lease and 18 months from now, Huizar's office figures out, shoot, we just found $2 million or 2.1 or 2.2, whatever the appraised value is, and then all of a sudden we found that money. The city, as long as the two parties, the city, the owner of the property, and the person who has the 20-year lease, if they agree to now negotiate a purchase, nothing tells us we have to wait an additional 18 and a half years in order to do that. We can do that anytime during the 20-year lease, even though there's not an option clause in here specifically. But the thing is, all it takes is two parties to agree that they now want to negotiate a purchase, regardless of whether or not they're sitting on a 2-year lease or a 20-year lease.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And to answer Councilmember Parks' question, I think the board's concern, as well as the funders, as should be obvious, is to put several $1 million into a building where we're operating on kind of an expired 30-day turnover.
Custom and practices, people think you're crazy if you're going to put millions of dollars into a property that you might not, you might get kicked out of in a few years.
And I think if you owned it, they may even want to up it to $6 million.
Yeah, but not to purchase, to refurbish. Okay.
Yeah, but, one of the things, and again, I went through this for other purposes, but We want to make sure that, number one, we'll get that policy done, but we'd like to make sure that you don't lose focus on the importance that the city is in the business of trying to recover some of its money in addition. And part of that is hopefully between CD 14 and 9, that they can scurry around and find the right color of money that then puts it back in the pot, that even if their districts are the only one that benefits from it, or if the whole city benefits from it, we can redistribute that money to where we can do things that we can't do now, put them on a better footing to where they own the property, which is what I think people's ultimate goal is. And from what I understand about LAMP, there would be no discussion as to whether the product they produce would be valuable enough to pay off the note in services. Because I think everybody supports the fact of the job they do. So I think you'd have all these pieces. The issue is, can the district 14 and 9 come together and find out of what sources of money that they can come within their collective regions with CRA, and with all the buildings going on downtown, I can bet you that there's money in some of those pots that allows them to provide that service that takes us out of the leasing business.
Duly noted.
All right, thank you. Public comment is open on item number 1. Is there anybody else here to speak on item number 1? Seeing and hearing none, public comment on item number 1 is now closed. With that, do we have a motion to approve?
We'll motion to approve, but I'd like to add that direction that we asked CD 9 and 14 to come together and look at their other resources with the ultimate goal of removing this lease agreement into a ownership agreement.
But that's separate and apart from the black and white document of the lease. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, with that, this item is approved. Is there anybody here for general public comment? General public comment to this committee is now open. Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. Thank you all very much. And Eduardo Hewitt.